Hello, ToobTimers. Well, I finished rebuilding the crossover for my friend's speaker system, and I wanted to show you the results. If you remember, or if you recall, this is the original crossover circuit that was on the back of this particular plate. It's about, 1980s vintage components. The electrolytics were shot. All of them were shot. Had some other wonky things going on with the frequency response. And my friend asked me to rebuild this thing for him because he said that the higher frequencies weren't sounding quite right. And I said, okay, we'll see what we can do. Now, I used Solon film capacitors. Solon is a mid-premium to premium brand of crossover capacitor. They did a very good job. No more electrolytics. They made this one here is a 10 microfarad Solon, pretty good size. 6.8 microfarad Solon. So it didn't need to have the electrolytics in there. If you recall, I'll show you in the back. Here's the woofer coil, the tweeter coil, and the little switch I added to boost some of the treble response. All right, so years ago when I worked in a manufacturing plant, there was a sign that was held up above the lab door that said, "In God we trust, all others must show data." So I'm going to show you the data on my improvement to this crossover. I didn't want you to take it for me on my word alone, but let's take a look and see what the data has to say for itself. All right, let me move this stuff a bit out of the way. And we're going to take a look at the original. The original crossover response. And it looks something like this. Well, it was cranky. If you recall, see if I can get some of this interference down. Sadly, I don't have a good way of displaying this paper very well, so we'll just sort of tweak it up and see if we can make some sense of it. This is the woofer response. So up to about 1 kilohertz, the woofer is completely engaged and the tweeter is attenuated. At the crossover frequencies, the woofer input becomes attenuated and the tweeter input comes up to normal. That's the way this should work, and it in fact does, but take a look at some of this woogity curving. I like that for a word, a woogity curving. Look at these anomalies. I don't know what those are other than defects in the components used, the original components. Defects or just lifed out. Now, it's kind of important. I've drawn a line down the side here. 20 kilohertz is the upper end for normal adult human hearing. Now, I'm an older person, so my high frequency attenuation is even greater. I'm probably down around 15 kilohertz, if I remember right, because I sort of tested myself once with an oscillator and seeing where I'd stop hearing it. And I seem to remember 15 kilohertz is about the high end of my hearing anymore. Sad, but true. Now, let's see what we have done for improvement. Here is the crossover circuit for the crossover response for the new circuit I built. Look at the woofer remains the same, begins to tweak up a little bit. Why? Because it's finding some sort of a resonant frequency in the crossover. That's all very normal. The tweeter is greatly attenuated and very smooth. Moving from the full attenuation right up until when you begin to hear the tweeter in this range here. Now I want to show you that the tweeter circuit is just slightly attenuated, or appears that way. That may not be the case because I used basically a unit signal, only 6 volts, to the input of this thing, which is not nearly enough to drive the equipment. But the general wave shapes would be similar. If this is in fact true for the new unit, well, then you have to boost the tweeter frequency a little bit. That's not particularly unusual. This part shows an emphasis on your mid-range because of the resonance in the components, and that could be toned down a little bit by using a mid-range, turn down the mid-range in the frequency response of your amplifier. Notice the woofer then also toned down quite nicely, and at minus 50 dB, that's a pretty hefty. You're in the dirt now. We're not going to hear any of that nonsense on the amplifier. So I'm really rather pleased with this whole thing. I go from 20 to 20 kilohertz, which is the limits of a general adult, typical adult hearing. Unless you're old like me, then you have to knock it down a notch or two. And so I'm very, very happy with how this turned out. Yes, they're a little bit bigger. These are much bigger crossover circuit boards than was the original glue on the back, clustered up kind of a thing. But I was assured that there's plenty of room in the speaker enclosure, and I'm not surprised that there is. Plenty of room to mount these things nicely and out of the way. It also gives a more professional appearance to the tweeter network, as well as makes it easier for troubleshooting or repair if you need to. You can actually take this apart. The original circuit, no, you couldn't take it apart without making a heck of a mess. So that's it for the part 2 of the reference crossover rebuild. If anyone has any questions or comments, please put them in the bottom or in the comment section of this YouTube video. If you have questions, I'd be glad to explain a little bit more what I did. It's pretty simple rebuild. It was like for like. So there was no particular design, no particular problems. I think most everyone can do something like this. And if your speaker system is more than 20 years old, you may very well want to consider rebuilding your own network, crossover network. Okay, next, this is going to end our little Sidetrack series, part 2 of 2. I'm going to get back to the Noob Sound, Sunbuck, Duke Audio 6P1 amplifier. But before we do that, I'm going to have a little bit of a visual presentation on the maximum power transfer theorem. This is something I know everyone is kind of questioning and they wonder what's going on. So for I'm going to use like minimal to no math. This will be very simple to understand what's going on. So I hope you all will watch or listen to that. Please subscribe to my channel. It helps me understand what people like and don't like. If you will, give me a thumbs up so I know if they like this type of video. And I wish everyone good health, good fortune, and we'll see you a little later. Bye now.